Iran's got just over a year to go to presidential elections, to be held against a very unusual political background. In February 2020, parliamentary elections were held, and by late May, a brand new house swung in. Iran's 11th Parliament, or Islamic Consultative Assembly, has started work. It is to be seen whether it will be working in tandem with the moderate government or in conflict with it, and to what end. For predictions and for an introduction to some new members, stay with me, Leila Faramarzi, on Iran Today. Unprecedentedly unified, the House is now chaired for the first time in 41 years since the revolution by a former military figure and police chief. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf was once commander of the IRGC Air Force, the IRGC being the Revolutionary Guard Corps. Mr. Naqvi is a former parliamentarian who was ever ready to criticize the system, but even he would put limits in place. Would you say that the leaning of this latest parliament, a mostly principlist parliament, would be a challenge to the present government? Or perhaps the government and parliament might balance each other out?
I
think that the most ideal condition would be for the new parliament to have positive and constructive interaction with the government, exercise its supervisory task, and fulfill its statutory obligations in case any ministry or a state organ is found in breach of its obligations. But it would be extremely harmful should Parliament adopt a confrontational approach. No useful step would be taken, and the government is in its final year in office, and it may not care if any confrontation is to occur. Our people would bear the brunt of such confrontation.
Hassan Rouhani is speculated to face confrontation at every turn. Ghalibaf rivaled him in the 2017 presidential elections and just last month bashed any prospect of talks with the US. This was in his maiden speech as parliamentary speaker. And this is while Rouhani's pet project was the Iran nuclear deal, inked by Foreign Minister Zarif with 6 world powers, including the US. Not an easy achievement. I asked MPs old and new what future they predicted for that deal, what's known as the JCPOA. Mr. Rastine is among the new, as are Messrs. Jafari and Taheri, soon to speak on the show. Rastine is of IRGC background.
The story of the JCPOA is a big matter of sadness for our nation. Several years after the JCPOA was signed, a number of issues have become clear to our people. First, the JCPOA failed to resolve our economic problems. Second, the JCPOA was imposed by hegemonic powers, particularly the United States of America, on other countries including ours. Third, unfortunately, the government failed to comply with conditions set out by the leader for the government in implementing the JCPOA. Fourth, after Trump pulled out of the JCPOA, our politicians started to think that if Democrats come to power in the US, we would not have this problem. But Trump's decision was the US's decision, not just the Republicans. This wrong imagination of Trump's wrong decision continues to dominate our politicians' minds, pushing them into thinking that Trump's successor would be a Democrat. And fifth, following Trump's JCPOA withdrawal, confidence in the European Union's promise to skate around US sanctions and help Iran proved to be wrong.
The JCPOA was quickly passed in the 9th Parliament, which was controlled by the anti-West camp, which is now again in the absolute majority in Parliament.
A major cause of today's problems stems from sanctions. The new parliament has not developed any clear solution to our international challenges. The 11th and 12th administrations presented plans, be it successful or not. For instance, it said signing the nuclear deal would resolve our international problems. The Americans quit the JCPOA and it proved to be ineffective. The question here is to know what plan the 11th Parliament would have on the international arena.
Rouhani's defense of the 2015 nuclear deal that limited Iran's nuclear program in return for lifting economic UN sanctions off this country has been that the JCPOA was to tell the world our nuclear program, which had so many resolutions passed against it, was actually peaceful. That the UN Security Council Resolution 2231 indicates that Iran has the right to have nuclear activities and calls on the world to help Iran. That by signing the deal and getting Resolution 2231 passed, we reduced sanctions that were saying that Iran has no right to sell and buy weapons to 5 years. And so, sanctions related to Iran's nuclear activities were removed. Yes, the US pulled out of the deal and reimposed and added to the sanctions. But in spite of banking sanctions, Iran has relations with 300 banks. Mr. Hosseini is a third-term MP with a living memory of past happenings in Iranian politics.
I think that Rouhani administration was mainly focused on politics rather than action. He always raised the issue of sanctions, which were effective in specific sectors only. The sanctions may prove ineffective in some sectors. For instance, an investor says he wants to come and invest in the copper industry, while the administration shows no cooperation. Well, it would get nowhere. We don't have any difficult expectations from the administration. We just wanted to clear the way. Most of our production is done domestically and we don't depend on foreign nations. We have to find out why the administration has not taken any action in this regard so far. Actually, I plan to summon the president to parliament and be accountable to people.
President Rouhani's defense of the deal makes full sense. Except that in focusing on relations with the West, Eastern and regional relations may have been partly overlooked. That's what the principalists mainly are up in arms against.
We held talks on many occasions with the foreign minister, telling him that he had put all his eggs in the basket of the US and several European nations. We warned that should the JCPOA fail, Iran would lose Russia, China, and neighboring countries altogether. We told him to preserve both. We have 15 neighbors, which represents big potential. They imagined for 6 years that Iran had abandoned them. Naturally, they would find other options. Even in Iraq and Syria, in which we have lost martyrs, other countries are reaping economic profits.
All said, even the current moderate government is not willing to renegotiate terms with the US. They have said Iran can enter talks only if the US returns to the 2015 nuclear deal to the letter of its law. It's not that newly elected MPs, some 250 out of 290 of whom are principalist, are not interested in foreign policy. They just believe in a very different version of foreign policy. Evident of this is their application for parliamentary committee memberships. 72 MPs applied for membership in the Parliament's Foreign Policy Committee. Only 12 showed an interest in joining the Cultural Committee, and 3 applied for membership in the Judicial and Legal Committee.
We have to see everything in practice. We cannot judge now. The parliament structures are just taking shape. Parliamentary committees have yet to be set up. But I can say that the new parliament would have to pursue a different path given our people's expectations.
Many parliamentarians are poorly experienced in executive work. For instance, of 30 MPs elected in Tehran constituency, maybe 10 have already served as manager or earlier sat in the parliament. The rest are not experienced enough. I reviewed their background and I saw that some of them, for instance, had been managers of a website or an NGO.
Talking of the principalist opposition, Ghalibaf ran for president 3 times in 2005, 2013 and 2017. A member of the Expediency Council, he is now also head of the legislature. Hence, the government's actions are expected to go further under the microscope. Accusing the government of inefficiency and confusion and therefore making the current situation even more dangerous, Ghalibaf rebuked the government for focusing its look on the outside. He called negotiations with the US of little outcome and more harm.
Fighting against the current administration will not benefit the country at all. We don't want just to show opposition, we want to take action. Therefore, I believe that we should assist the administration and exercise more supervision with a view to realizing our objectives.
To balance policy in terms of dealing with the country's problems, Iranians have alternated their vote between factions all along, the mainstream two factions being principalists and reformists. Today, a conservative parliament emerging has much to do with the US's 2018 unilateral pullout from the multilateral international deal that was the JCPOA and its tightening of sanctions on this country. Our interviewees say if US sanctions had anything to do with the people turning to a conservative principalist rhetoric rather than the current moderate one.
ما همیشه در طول این 40 سالی که از انقلاب گذشته
We have seen ups and downs in the political and social arenas over the past 40 years since the Islamic Revolution. People are attracted to political factions and tendencies based on their seriousness in resolving their problems. People would definitely distance themselves from political factions when they see that they do not take into consideration their demands. The new parliament election showed a change in people's taste.
Time for a short break. We'll be back in no time. Governments are moderate, reformist or principalist. To have a single-party parliament, however, is an unusual phenomenon. What Iran's new parliament more or less is, a monochrome spectrum of principalists. I have an MP interviewee, however, who begs to differ.
ببینید البته این مجلس که شما فقط
The current parliament comprises revolutionary forces. In other words, we no longer have a polarized regime of principalists and reformists. We have an effective and reliable revolutionary current. People have trusted these MPs and therefore the new parliament is expected to find solutions to existing problems.
Mr. Naqavi detects a serious problem.
این مجلس
The current parliament is almost harmonious. For me, it's harmful, although many may praise such a structure. The parliament comprises a single block. How can be a clash of thoughts possible? Therefore, it will later on cause harm to the single block parliament. When there are powerful factions in the parliament to have clash of thoughts, the parliament would be far more dynamic. But now 250 MPs currently sitting in the parliament are aligned. 30 are independent and we may have at most 2 reformist MPs. So we have no other reformist MP or MPs who would oppose the dominant view of the parliament.
Rouhani believes in cooperation between government and parliament, however different their vision of management might now be. He called on the new assembly or parliament to prioritize national interests over partisanship, urging cooperation in the war against US sanctions and provocations. I asked for a clarification of the principalist approach to running the country, which stems from their worldview.
The Revolutionary Front favors indigenous politics with a focus on extensive international interactions. It believes in the 3 principles of honor, wisdom and expediency in its international relations. Except for the Zionist regime of Israel, which we do not recognize, and the US, whose hand is stained with the blood of our children, with the most wicked case being the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani, we have relationships with every other nation in the world. We believe that we have to develop widespread international interactions. The Revolutionary Front believes in better ties with neighboring and friendly nations. Our ideology is based on self-esteem, national honor, safeguarding national interests and rejecting red lines threatening our independence.
Whatever the dominant leaning of members, what is the significance and status of Parliament, this legislative arm of the country? Legislation and the law per se, after all, is but a collection of well-versed books.
Members of parliament are mainly tasked with legislation and supervision of the implementation of law. Furthermore, depending on circumstances, some members of parliament would intervene in issues that may arise in their constituencies, as provided for in the Constitution.
The parliament's supervisory role has been downgraded. One reason is that MPs, in interaction with government, are willing to fulfill their electoral promises. MPs always promise building bridges, paving roads, laying pipelines, building factories and creating jobs when they campaign for parliament. But it's not up to MPs. People have trusted him and voted him into parliament. Now MPs are expected to fulfill their promises while they have no authority in this regard. Therefore, they have to interact with the executive power. Therefore, he depends on ministers, government managers, and provincial governors for the projects he has promised. When you need them for your election promises, you have to interact with the government in order to make your promises come true.
It's time for a quick break to see what other media outlets have to say. For that, I give you Shahrzad.
Hi, I'm Shahrzad Mancheri, and this is the news section of Iran Today. We'll be looking online for the latest update on Iran's new Majlis, prospects and challenges. The Financial Tribune reports new Majlis vows tough line on U.S. ties. The recently elected Speaker of the Iranian Parliament said the new legislature is opposed to any negotiation or compromise with the United States and deems it futile and harmful. The 11th Majlis supports expansion of relations with the global community, but maintains that relying on governments that have a dark record, both during their own history and during the period of the Islamic Republic, is a strategic mistake, Mohammad Baqir Ghalibaf said in his first speech to the Majlis. The administration of U.S. President Donald Trump has initiated a maximum pressure campaign to force Iranian leaders to renegotiate a new and more comprehensive deal. Tehran has refused to enter into any talks unless sanctions are lifted completely and the damage on the Iranian economy is compensated. Tehran Times takes a look into how Majlis tasks Iranian government to establish a virtual embassy in Palestine. Iran's lawmakers passed a motion against the hostile measures of the Zionist regime. In an open session of the parliament, the MPs ratified the motion by unanimous vote, tasking the government to establish a virtual embassy in Palestine. The new law also bans the use of hardware manufactured by the Zionist regime, bans activities of software platforms owned by the Israeli regime, and bars all natural and legal persons, organizations, and companies affiliated with the Zionist regime from attending Iranian exhibitions and gatherings. The new law also defines the punishment for cooperation with Israeli-linked institutions and stipulates that traveling to the occupied territories by Iranian nationals will carry imprisonment and passport deprivation up to 5 years. ISNA claims priorities of new parliament should be justice, employment, production, national currency, as said by the leader. Iran's leaders stress that when the members of Majlis carry out their legislative duties and their other obligations by doing expert work, with their active presence and punctuality, and with sincerity and trustworthiness, it will emerge as a source of hope for the people, and as a source of reliance for executives, and as the highest echelon of national affairs in the true sense of the word. Another part of the statement reads, in the present time, economic and cultural affairs are the highest priorities of the country. Regarding the economy, as well as the existing tangible problems, we should acknowledge that we have not gotten a good grade in terms of justice while we are in the decade of progress and justice. This bitter reality should move everyone into making theoretical and practical efforts to resolve the livelihood problems of underprivileged classes of society. That's all for this segment. We'll see you next week.
In Iran, parliament has much more extensive duties compared to the parliaments of the world in general. That could be due in part to the excessive authority of the executive branch. That is to say, parliament here has traditionally had to supervise an overly powerful government for actual execution of laws passed. There has been plenty of talk of transparency, given explosive embezzlement or disappearance of resources.
As far as transparency is concerned, we have statutory problems as we have no comprehensive law. There are scattered laws in national 5-year development plans. The problem stems from the fact that our executive and supervisory systems would not favor high transparency.
Majlis is considered the most fundamental democratic pillar. Its dissolution is impossible, and it is to be active under all circumstances. Expectations of parliamentarians, however, are not always realistic, perhaps because the promises made by parliamentary candidates were not realistic to begin with. I asked these new MPs of their promises and plans for their constituencies. They put it into a national context, however.
My promises have been national rather than provincial. At the national level, I've highlighted some root causes of problems, and at the provincial level, I have called for overcoming challenges like water shortage. In my province, Zanjan, the precipitation is higher than many other provinces, but its access to drinking water is lower than others. Zanjan offers great potential for agriculture, but it does not have what it really deserves. Our top priority for provincial development is the issue of water, which will be followed by industry and handicraft.
Our legislative plans included implementation of social justice in underprivileged provinces too. All MPs have this issue in mind with regard to local legislation. Otherwise, MPs are required to identify the major challenges in the country regarding its supervisory role. The Parliament is required to make sure whether or not the path it has traced is being taken. We have to see if executive organs are moving on the track or they have derailed.
The new Parliament has a claim and promise of its own. That is to overcome sanctions and managing the economy, well, in providing incentive for managing the economy.
I think that the top priority for resolving economic problems is the issue of transparency. First, political transparency for people, and then the economic transparency of the society for the government. At present, our money stock amounts to $2,400,000. Everywhere in the world, such money would have developed the country. If there was transparency, we would see where it's being invested. Taxation would have forced this money to serve production, but we're doing exactly the opposite. We're leading money towards speculation.
Not all principalists have always been opposed to a moderate president. Rouhani got to mobilize his voters by the backing of the reformists. At the same time, his principalist allies further deepened his backing in the system's power centers. But as he loses ground, even reformists might withdraw their backing as the country nears presidential elections in August next year. It sounds unfair, but the reality is, not all economic woes are down to US sanctions. The Center for International and Strategic Studies at the University of Maryland conducted a poll in October 2019. It found that 59% of Iranians believe that Iran should leave the JCPOA, and only 24% viewed European efforts to create channels for trade with Iran in a positive light. That's because European partners to the JCPOA haven't practically managed to circumvent US secondary sanctions to ease Iran's economic woes.
The illegal and bullying US sanctions, running counter to international law, have created serious restrictions for us. We have to find a solution internally, which I think we can, thanks to our big potential. If we can benefit from the existing international loopholes, we would be able to run the country effectively.
With a desperately depreciated and depreciating rial, that's the national currency, with prices raised by 30%, on top of an inflation that was already estimated at 35–40%, and with bank interest rates decreased rather than increased from over 20% to 15%, managing the economy may call for a closer look at forgotten pockets of this rich and diverse country. Oil is not all it has.
We don't have any specific expectation from the administration. We just want the administration not to cause any problem to investment. Investors are ready to invest in various sectors. We welcome them. They can invest in tourism, natural resources, agriculture, banking, copper industry, precious stones, and etc.
That's it for today. Thanks for watching from the whole team. Do watch again at the same times next week and each week after, as you never know what's on. And don't forget to leave your comments and topic requests. Bye for now.